Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to start the next section. So thank you to everybody that's online. We've got a few people online. We've got a lot more people in the room. Oh, sorry, Steph is trying to move the camera and I'm shifting around. I'll try and stay put. Apologies if I do sound a little bit strange, but I've just been to the dentist. Okay, so we've got Jackie Humphreys from University of Queensland. So this whole session has a Queensland a feel to it. So I'm going to Queensland, and we've got Jackie. Well, I'm joining Griffiths, and we've got Jackie from UQ, and actually we've got Nadeem who's going to be joining UQ. So we're slightly transported to Queensland. So Jackie is an associate professor of finance at UQ. She does a lot of really interesting work in climate finance, but she also ran a interdisciplinary grouping at UQ focused on the environment. And yeah, we met in my role as a director of GRASFI. We were trying to get UQ back into GRASFI at the time. And yeah, we shared a lot of experiences of running interdisciplinary groups. And so I thought, it'd be great to get Jackie's perspective. So Jackie, welcome, and we look forward to your speech or your keynote on interdisciplinary collaborations in sustainable finance.
All right, thank you so much, Ivan, for the lovely introduction. I'm just going to get myself sorted here. Yes, so yeah, thanks again for having me. I was delighted to be asked to do this keynote and talk a bit about interdisciplinary research and what that looks like. So my title of the talk is perhaps a little bit of a misnomer. So I'm going to be talking more about, as a finance researcher, what can interdisciplinary research look like? I thought this would help. So I thought I'd start out by talking about what exactly is interdisciplinary. Talk about some of the pros and cons of doing interdisciplinary research, and then some advice. So this is probably me getting on my hobby horse, so I'll try and keep it short and sweet. But in this section, I really want you to talk about, really thinking through, if I'm a finance researcher, should I be doing interdisciplinary research? And then finally talk a little bit about my experiences. So I started off looking into what does interdisciplinary actually mean. So I'm sure you know that there are all of these terms that are bandied about. So there's multidisciplinary, there's transdisciplinary, there's interdisciplinary, there's cross-disciplinary. So what does interdisciplinary actually even mean? So it turns out that there's actually a stream of research, of course, looking at what is interdisciplinary and trying to actually define that. So I spent a little bit of time down that rabbit hole reading some of that research, but I found this research which I thought was really helpful. So as you can see, this has come from a critical review of the literature into defining interdisciplinary research. So this in itself is even a research stream. So what this study, the definition that this study came up with, which I thought really defines it quite nicely. So I've highlighted the key points here in bold. So scholars from two or more distinct scientific disciplines. All right, so we've got people from different disciplines. I think we all get that bit. That links or integrates theoretical frameworks from those disciplines, uses study designs and methodology that is not limited to any one field, and requires the use of perspectives and skills of the involved disciplines through multiple phases of the research. So what you'll see here is we've got these different elements coming through. So we've got obviously the different disciplines, but we've got different theoretical frameworks, we've got different methodologies, and we've got different perspectives or skill all being combined into doing this research. This same study had also a definition, just this table, which I found quite helpful in trying to tease out, okay, well, what's the difference between interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, and transdisciplinary? So I had no idea, right? I thought all of these things were completely interchangeable, and I'm sure we've all been guilty of using these terms interchangeably as well. So multidisciplinary The idea here is that you've got, so with all of these terms, you've got people from different disciplines, right? So two or more disciplines collaborating in the research. With multidisciplinary though, I liked how they described this as parallel play. So the idea, a multidisciplinary project, for example, would be you've got a team of researchers that go and get a very large national grant, and they're going to work on 3 different papers, with that grant funding, but they're all going to be working separately. So you've got the physicists in your team, and they're going to go off and write a physics paper on the topic, and then you've got your educational people who are going to go and write an education paper on the topic. So although the funding is common, that everyone is working in their own discipline, and then they're doing a publication within their own discipline. So interdisciplinary, so this is where you've got 2 or more academics working together, and we're going to create a shared publication, okay? And so the language, and I'm also going to point out this idea of language. So the language that we're using is intelligible to all of the fields. And we're going to be drawing our research style from the different fields as well. So interdisciplinary is really, I work with someone who's not in my discipline. I bring my skills to the table, to the publication. They bring their skills to the publication, and we work together on the same project, and we produce a publication together with us using our skills that we've brought from our own discipline. And then you've got transdisciplinary. So this one I'm still trying to get my head around a little bit. So here again, you've got different people from different disciplines, but this is really about, so we can see here, stated in a new language. There's a new theory that's that's broader than any one discipline. We're going to have a shared publication, but it's probably using some new language developed for translational lines across traditional lines. So transdisciplinary is much more, I suppose, liquid in terms of what's the end product. So it's really much more blurring the lines. I would say that I've mainly worked in the interdisciplinary area. So I hope that's a little bit helpful in teasing out some of these terms. I then wanted to talk a little bit about what it's like doing interdisciplinary research, and talk through some of the pros and cons of doing the research. So when I was reflecting on my experiences doing interdisciplinary research, and perhaps probably my initial experiences, so when I first started doing this, I thought the best analogy was this one. So this is Alice in Wonderland at the Mad Hatter's Tea Party. Okay, so it really did sometimes feel like this. So I found this beautiful quote, which I thought summed it up fantastically. So Alice felt dreadfully puzzled. The Hatter's remark seemed to have no sort of meaning in it, and yet it was certainly English. That's kind of sometimes how it feels with doing interdisciplinary research. So you kind of have no idea what these other people are talking about, because the language is different, what they bring to the table is different. So anyway, that's a little bit of a joke, but that is sometimes how it can feel, particularly in the beginning. So moving on from there, I thought I would start off with some of the disadvantages, the cons of doing interdisciplinary research. So I guess, as I've hinted to, one of the difficulties can be navigating these disciplinary norms. So when you're writing a paper that's not in your area, and you're targeting a journal that's not, so obviously I'm going to assume that we're all finance researchers, but I'm sure it would be similar in economics. But the writing style or the language that we would use in finance, the way we would structure papers, is very different, and there's different publication norms as well. So you need to relearn how to actually shape your papers. I had quite an interesting experience so Ivan mentioned that I ran an interdisciplinary research group for a while, and we ran a conference, an interdisciplinary conference. It was fantastic fun. It was great, but even just trying to set up the parameters of the conference was different. So I was running the group with someone who had a background in management, and so she said, okay, well, we'll ask people to submit their 2,000 word paper. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? And so she says, oh, well, because when you go to a conference, you don't submit the actual paper, you submit you submit a different version of it. So I'm like, what? So apparently in management, it's not, you don't actually submit the paper. You have to write almost a new paper to submit to the conference. And then she was really shocked to discover that in finance we just send the actual paper. So there these kind of little things that are a bit strange. Publication norms can also be around, what I've noticed with some disciplines is that the editors are much more perhaps helpful than we would normally see in finance. So they're much happier for you to email with them. So anyway, so that can be something that's just something to learn. Another disadvantage can be that obviously you need to read much more widely. So the startup cost can be quite high. As an academic, we tend to be specialists in our field. So we've got years behind us of research and reading that we've done. And so if you're starting to work in a different discipline, then obviously you need to familiarize yourself with the area that you're in. So there can be a startup cost as well. Finding appropriate places to present your work can be hard as well. So this is a function of a couple of things. So one would be your existing networks. So for example, I mainly know people in finance. I go to finance conferences. When I visit schools, I go to visit the finance department. And so if I've got a paper that's really not in finance, it can be quite hard to find somewhere to present your work just because of your networks. Or when you've got a paper that kind of bridges disciplines, it can also be difficult, just in terms of the audience really connecting with what you're trying to present. And if I have time, I'll tell you another little story about one of my experiences on this one. You need to work harder at maintaining your identity as an academic from your discipline. So I've certainly been told a few times, "Are you a finance academic?" Yes, I am. I just happen to also work, in an interdisciplinary way as well. So, this thing of academic identity is important in terms of your often with universities, your promotion, but also in terms of, just your reputation in the community. So that can be something that can be, you need to work a bit harder as well. So having said all of that, I think I've told you the downside, but there are also a lot of benefits to working interdisciplinary. So one is that you can really ask more interesting questions. So you can ask you can ask really cutting edge research questions because you're bringing skills from different people's skills. And so you can work beyond the limitations or the boundary of your discipline. And that's been something that's been really, really great that I've really enjoyed doing. You can get a much broader and a much richer understanding of a particular topic by understanding and by seeing how other disciplines have looked at this particular issue. You have access to a wider pool of co-authors, of course, and you can draw on a much wider range of skills and methodologies. So, for example, in finance, we wouldn't do interviews. And so that really cuts off a whole lot of really interesting research questions we could ask just because we don't use that methodology. And so as another example, in finance, usually we need data, right? We need numbers, and so where there's no database or there's no data, perhaps because a topic is very, very new, we actually can't study that using our finance tools. And so one of the advantages of working in an interdisciplinary way is that you can actually work on these really cutting edge areas that finance just is not going to enable you to be able to do because we can't use our skills. Another potential, this is a minor issue, but something just to raise is our finance journals don't really have very high impact factors. So if we look at the top finance journal, the impact factor 7.9, Nature is 10 times that. So, you have a chance to basically also hit a much wider audience as I said, publish in journals with high impact factors. And finally, what I've discovered is it's really fun. So it's been great to be able to actually work on, as I said, these cutting edge projects, these projects that I wouldn't be able to work on if I just limited myself to my finance journals. It's fun to work out how other disciplines do research and looking at some of their methodologies and then thinking, okay, well, how can I use that methodology in my research? Are there research questions that I can actually ask using other methodologies or understandings from other disciplines? Okay, so interdisciplinary sustainability research, should I be doing it? And so this is just some of my thoughts, and I'm totally going to take all of the blame on this one. All right, so should you be doing interdisciplinary research? I wanted to talk particularly, obviously, about sustainability. That's my area, and obviously is the area of this conference as well. So finance is not a leader in sustainability or climate thinking. So in terms of climate finance, we've only just recently come to the table. So in sustainability, similar thing. Other fields started thinking about sustainability and climate issues decades before us. Okay, so what that means is that if you're just looking in finance, as I said, we're not on the cutting edge. We're not the thought leaders. If you want to work in climate finance or sustainability within finance, I think it is really important to read outside of finance. So for climate finance, read some of the papers in environmental science. The first word in climate finance is climate, okay? So how about if you're going to work in climate finance, get some knowledge about climate. And climate really, where is a lot of the thinking being? It's in environmental sciences. Where would be a good place to start? Maybe look at the planetary boundaries framework. So if, read some of those papers. These days, you can even do edX courses. It's not difficult to access this information. If you're looking at doing sustainable finance, read some of the papers in management. This is where the thinking has really started, and this is where the thinking is much more developed than it has been in our disciplines. So, for example, if you're looking at doing sustainable finance, read the papers on stakeholder theory. Okay, so Hartins and Gallas didn't actually come up with stakeholder theory. I see that paper, I see that being cited. It wasn't them, okay? It was Edward Freeman in the 1980s. So, it's really important to become familiar with the theoretical frameworks, with where are these ideas coming from. I've got here why. Because we've got, as I said, we've got decades of thinking from other fields. We in finance have taken ideas from these other fields and applied them in our field, which is fantastic, but we didn't come up with those ideas. Also, what I'm seeing, particularly with climate finance, is I'm seeing some really terrible research coming out. So just in terms of doing a climate finance paper doesn't mean, oh, I'm going to take the finance question that I always ask. I'm going to download some data from, Thomson Reuters, and then I'm going to shove in another variable into my equation. That's a really weak finance paper. That's just a really weak paper, okay? So if you have a broader understanding of the area, you're going to be able to think through better, what are the environmental issues? What are the sustainability issues? What is the history of that? How has that looked? And then you'll be able to ask better finance questions, okay? Rather than just shoving in another variable into your regression. So please, if you're thinking about doing sustainability or climate finance, do wider reading. You'll be a better researcher because of it. You'll also be more knowledgeable. And so that will help you. Even if you decide to do a finance paper, having that background will really help you. Okay, so should you be doing interdisciplinary research? If you're an early career academic, I would say probably not yet. So if you're an early career academic, you really need your job at this point. So what I'm talking about is, 2, 3, 4 years out of your PhD. At this point, what you really need to do is develop your expertise and your reputation in your field. So if you're in finance, you should be doing finance research and publishing in finance journals. Your first publications should be in your own field. And that's really important just from a career perspective. So really early in your career, publishing outside of your field might not be the best career strategy for you. But, and this is a big but, please read outside your field. So if you're working on sustainability, if you're in climate finance, and that's really where you want to position yourself as an academic, as I said before, read really widely. Don't just focus on the finance research. Further on in your career, definitely consider broadening your research agenda. And so, as I spoke about before, interdisciplinary research is about me bringing my skills as a finance researcher to a collaboration. And so what do we bring to the table as finance researchers? What do we bring to the table? Actually, we bring a lot. So I would say our competitive advantage, to use economic terminology, or the skill that's attractive for us, is we actually have strong statistical or econometrics knowledge. A lot of disciplines don't have that. And so they're limited in what they can do because they're not numerate. Okay, so sometimes just the fact that we're numerate, that can actually be an advantage in an interdisciplinary team. That's not a given within other disciplines, that you're able to analyze data. Okay, then finally, I realize I have 5 minutes. So I wanted to talk a little bit about my experiences, so my background, and then kind of, how I've worked in the interdisciplinary way. And then I wanted to talk as well through some of the papers that I've worked on and talk about what I brought to the table. So what was my role in that particular paper? And hopefully that will be a way for you to start thinking about what would be a way that you could work in an interdisciplinary environment. Okay, so I have a little bit of an eclectic education. So I do have a PhD in finance. Again, I am a finance researcher, but I've also done study in theology and also in higher education. So I think that really, and it's not necessary for you if you want to do interdisciplinary research to go and do study outside. But my background has helped me just in terms of being able to understand paradigms and think and look at how different disciplines approach different topics. I do need to say I didn't do particularly well in my theology or higher education education. I'm definitely more of a finance thinker, but those experiences were helpful, just in terms of kind of thinking about framing. So in terms of where I've come from as an academic, so I was a very early sustainable finance researcher. I probably don't want to age myself, but I actually started working on what was called socially responsible investment back then when I did my honours. Okay, so that was more than 20 years ago. I like to say that I was doing sustainable finance research before it was cool, which is definitely true. It was a very different world back then. And so what that meant was, there was very, very little literature in finance when I started. So it's been really interesting to see how the field has changed over the last 20 years. I've also supervised a number of students in an interdisciplinary team. So I've worked with people from engineering, so chemical engineering, mechanical and mining engineering, and then accounting, and also from tourism. And so that's been great fun in terms of shaping a research project for a student. And as Ivan mentioned before, I also led an interdisciplinary center on business sustainability within the business school at UQ. So we had about, I think we had about 30 researchers in that, all from different disciplines within business. And so all of these have led to interdisciplinary collaborations and also publications. So I still do mainly publish in finance. In the last 10 years, I'd say it's probably 2 to 1 in terms of finance to non-finance journals. So I am still a finance researcher. My first publication outside of finance was in 2018. So I was already an associate professor at that stage. So as I said before, I do think that it's, if you're early career, you probably do want to be focusing on, publishing in your area. Before that was what I did. So I published in finance journals or in kind of the finance section of interdisciplinary journals like Journal of Business Ethics. So back in the day, that was one of the very few avenues for publishing sustainable finance. Okay, I then wanted to give some examples of my interdisciplinary work, and I realize I have about 3 minutes, so I'll hurry along.
Well, that's fine, Jackie. Take another 5. You're good.
Take another 5. Okay, great. Thank you. All right. So I wanted to talk. So I'll talk about this paper first. So this was a paper where we were looking at plastic pollution and what corporations were actually disclosing about plastic. So the team, so we had Anya and Katie, who were from the business school. Their background is really in kind of management. Anya has also done some work in kind of environmental economics. And we had Helen Ross, who was from the School of Agriculture. She's come from an anthropology type background as well. So quite a diverse team. So what we did was we looked at corporate sustainability reports for multinational companies in the food and beverage sector. And we wanted to look at what they were doing about plastic, okay? So do they address plastic pollution? What are their sustainable packaging strategies? And if they address producer responsibility? So really interesting question. I knew zero about plastic, I think, before I'd started this collaboration. So it was really interesting. I think in finance, we talk a lot about climate, but plastics is like probably the number 2 or number 3 issue in terms of sustainability. I don't know that I could have written a finance paper on plastics. And so this was a great way for me to learn about this area. In terms of what we did, so as I said, we, as in Katie, analyzed corporate sustainability reports. And so she coded the reports. She did some qualitative analysis of what was in the reports. And then once she coded them, so we had basically, we looked at all the different issues that the companies had disclosed and then provided a score. And so my job really was to analyze those scores and come up with some kind of framework for talking about that. So this was an example where my skill was that I was numerate. So I could look at quantitative data and get some meaning out of it. So this is an example of one of the things that we looked at. So I worked out percentages and then just some very basic kind of descriptive statistics on what the companies were actually doing. What did we find? Just as a side note, what are companies doing? The answer is unfortunately not much. All right. So I think there's a lot of commitments. So about a third of the companies are saying yes, we're going to do stuff, and about 10% are actually doing things. So there's a big discrepancy between what companies are saying they're going to do, their commitments, and what they're actually doing. All right, so this paper was with Safira, who was my PhD student, and Kate O'Brien, who was from the School of Chemical Engineering. And this was where we had an interdisciplinary supervision. Now, this paper so what we looked at in this paper was we looked at the data that we all use, and we looked at environmental scores. Particularly, we looked at what data provided. So who am I talking about? I'm talking about Thomson Reuters Asset 4. I'm talking about MSCI ESG, etc. Okay, so we looked at 9 rating schemes that have been used in academic studies, and what we wanted to see was if we look at their carbon emissions data or scores, are those scores actually aligned with Paris Agreement? So are they telling us anything about what companies are doing in terms of actually being able to meet their in terms of actually being able to meet the 2 degrees Celsius commitment? This paper came out last year. However, we had been working on it for a few years before that. We didn't, so the bottom line was we didn't find, so none of the ratings agencies at that time were aligning their scores with companies actually being able to meet 2 degrees Celsius, which is pretty concerning. I do need to say that things have changed since then, and I know that a number of the ratings agencies have been working on much better metrics. So just as a caveat there. This one was pretty interesting. This was one of the papers that I presented at an unnamed overseas destination. This is probably the hardest presentation I've ever given. I did the presentation and it went down like a lead balloon. So it was a finance audience. And basically they looked at me like I'd been down from Mars or something, right? I sort of walked away and I was like, oh my gosh, like that feels like this is the worst paper I've ever written, right? Because of kind of the feedback and that I got from that presentation. It turns out anyway, so we've actually won a best paper award from the journal. So our paper was was awarded best paper 2021 by Business and Society. So again, this is just one of those things of the difficulties in working in an interdisciplinary area. So I wanted to talk quickly about that paper. We also have a Nature Climate Change paper. Again, this was from Saphira's paper. So obviously this was in, Environmental Science Journal, basically. In this one, we were looking at creating pathways for fossil fuel companies. And then finally, I'll just end very briefly with this one. So this was a more recent paper. So this was with Matthew and Cassie. So they're who are also in the business school at UQ. They have come over from psychology. This was an interesting one. So they had gotten to a second round of reviews at a particular journal, and they couldn't get past the reviewer. So this was an interdisciplinary journal, and the reviewer had said, so the reviewer had asked them to do some statistical tests, which they didn't know what it was or how to do it. So they tried to argue back, we don't need to do that. And the reviewer said, absolutely not. I'm not, like, you need to do this. They had no idea how to do that, that statistical test. And so I was just talking to Matthew just briefly, kind of one of those, water cooler kind of things. And I said, oh, I know how to do that. That's really, really basic. And said, oh, please, can you do this for us? And so I ended up doing some statistical analysis for them, and then kind of got them over the line with this journal. So again, this was probably one of the easiest publications I've ever had, because they were already so far in the review process, but without me, they couldn't get past that reviewer. So what I brought to the table was statistical ability. So again, I wanted to talk about that just because, just coming back to this idea of, what do we bring to the table in an interdisciplinary environment. So I will stop there. I think I'm on time, I hope. Thank you for listening, and I hope that you enjoyed my talk. Thank you. Any questions?
Jackie, I just want you to clarify that I didn't pay you to say all that.
I'm going to stop sharing. Absolutely, Ivan. As I recall, you'd said to me, what do you want to talk about? And I said, I want to talk about this. So I'm pretty sure that I came up with that.
Okay. So yeah, no, look, it really struck a chord. It's stuff that I've been saying, really interesting, fascinating. So Martine has a question. What do you think of the ABDC list in this context? So, so I think we're talking about, academics, performance measurement, let's say narrowness of disciplines, that sort of thing.
Yes. So the ABDC list is a very controversial topic. What you'll find is that a bunch of these journals are actually on the ABDC list. So, for example, Journal of Clean Production, Global Environmental Change, those are both on the ABDC list. So Global Environmental Change is an A-star on the ABDC list. So it is still possible so there are definitely journals you can target there. I don't know what your school's like, but for us, if you're going to try and go for something like a Nature or a Science, that's well regarded. Even if it is, obviously that's not going to be in the ABDC list, but I think something like a Nature or one of the Nature journals or one of the Science journals has got that brand name, that's always going to look good on your CV. So I hope that answers your question a little bit. It is hard for sure, but I think there are ways around it. And the ABDC list is actually very broad.
A lot better than the ABS list, right?
Correct, exactly.
Yeah. So we're quite lucky in that respect. Any more questions? I hope you're all going to do interdisciplinary research. I'll ask you a provocative question. So there's one thing I disagreed with you, which is researchers shouldn't do interdisciplinary research. And I guess that comes from someone that's been in a finance department all their life. And so I really—
Hang on. Sorry. I think I said shouldn't do it. Early career shouldn't do it. I think that's what I said.
Yeah. You said early caries. Yeah. I'm not sure I necessarily agree with that. Because I have a view that actually, I was really thinking, I've thought a lot about this. Is sustainable finance or climate finance going to happen in finance departments? Is it going to happen in geography departments? And the truth is, it's probably, especially with climate finance, you're going to need such specialized skill set that I think it may become almost like a new discipline in its own right. There was a stage where I thought, actually finance departments were going to ultimately dominate this discipline. I mean, you had people like Ben Caldecott in geography starting off. And then I saw there is a shift going towards business schools and finance departments. That shift is definitely happening. But I just wonder if actually when you think about climate finance, you need geospatial skills. You're never really going to naturally have that in a finance department. So I just wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, I think, and I think that comes down to this idea of collaboration, right? So I definitely agree with you. I agree and I disagree with you. I think climate finance has developed a lot in the last few years. So it's fantastic to see people like like Harrison Hong, like Brad Barber, these really big, Laura Starks, these really big people come. They're not all in climate, but they do all work in sustainability. I think it's been really helpful to have those kind of big names starting to work in this area because that gives legitimacy. But I do agree with you that again, it's really important to be broader than just bringing our finance skills. And yes, I agree. And certainly we're starting to see papers looking, doing some of that kind of geospatial type stuff. Is that something that I, as a finance researcher, should be doing? Probably not. But is it something that I should walk down the hallway and find someone to work with? Definitely. So yes, I think that's my 2 cents on that one.
Okay, fantastic. Oh, there's a question. Let me find the microphone. So we'll take this as the last one, and then.
There's a couple in the chat as well.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Yeah, thanks for your talk. Really enjoyed it. Quick question. Do you think there's any space in finance for qualitative research? Because there's actually a Center for Qualitative Research at a university in Scotland, and I think they actually have a journal of research in qualitative finance. So what's your view on that? And do you see the field moving towards more normative approaches, given that we're beginning to ask questions in the fields for which there's no data and we can't really do any quant stuff?
Yes.
It's really, new questions that are emerging because of the changing dynamics around sustainability.
Yes, that's a fantastic question. I love your question. Thank you for that. I think this is one of my frustrations as well. So as I said, we are a bit constrained in terms of the tools that we use in finance, and I think interviews are amazing, and and exactly as you've said, there's some questions that we just can't answer because the data is not there yet, and so we have to use interviews. So personally, I would love to see that kind of qualitative data starting to come out in finance. I don't know that I've seen it in the really good journals yet. I think we're very conservative as a discipline, and perhaps our kind of leading journals are even more conservative than us in general. So do I see that happening in the shorter term? So, am I expecting interview type analysis to come into our top journals? Probably not yet. And probably we would need a superstar to start pushing that. I think that would be my gut feel.
Cool. There's an interesting question from Wenting, so you can read it. So it's to save me, or I can read it. So, but and I'll have a go at answering. I'll give an example of one of our PhD students here that's just finished. So, do you have any suggestions for ECR who started their career in interdisciplinary research, noting there's not much choice in the job market? So we've just had Iftikhar Ahmed, who was one of our PhD students, and he had offers from Cambridge, Twente, had Oxford keen to interview him, so it didn't limit his career for sure.
Yeah, sure. So what is the job market looking for? I think what you need, what needs to be clear is, who are you as a researcher? Who are you as a researcher? So if you can have a narrative around, I'm a researcher in X, I bring X to the table. So why I'm saying, okay, so why I would say as an ECR you might not want to be an interdisciplinary researcher is just because it might be a little bit harder to signal your identity and to signal your value to the job market. I'm not saying that, again, I think perhaps finance disciplines are a little bit more traditional. And so if you've got amazing interdisciplinary research, I don't think that's going to kill your career. It's possibly just going to it's just probably going to put the onus on you to to sell your, not to sell, to explain your identity as a researcher and what you bring to a department. I think that's what I would say there. So if I can talk about my interdisciplinary research, mine has always been on sustainability. So yes, I've worked in interdisciplinary, but my identity is still, I'm a finance sustainability researcher. My interdisciplinary stuff is really, again, about that. Who is my identity as a researcher? I'm a sustainability finance researcher, and I can do sustainability more broadly than just finance. So I suspect, so if you're going to be an interdisciplinary researcher, there's still going to be that thing that you're interdisciplinary in. So I'm a sustainability researcher, or I'm an X researcher. Again, it just comes back down to identity as a researcher.
Wonderful. I see there's another question, but I think we're out of time, and it's a great question. So I'm sorry to the person that posed it. So how do we connect finance theory with climate and environmental issues? We could probably have a conference on that. Okay, wonderful, Jackie. That was honestly fantastic. So what a great topic, and really what a great presentation. So I recommend you do it more often. You should write a paper about this and ship it around, so that yeah, some really important points there. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.